Hi, I'm Peter J Rea. Welcome to my second floor lair. Today's topic is Resalest Remarkable Books number 18. Let's get this party started. Without further ado or further ado, well, it's time to stop these inane expressions. Anyway, our first book today is Wine of the Mystic, the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, a spiritual interpretation by Paramahansa Yogananda, published in 1995. Omar Khayyam was a Persian, what's now Iran. He lived in the about 1,000 years ago, and he wrote this very mystical book, and Paramahansa Yogananda interpreted his words it's about the spiritual life, spiritual path of yoga meditation, seeking God, seeking union with God, service work, and loving God, loving Divine Mother every moment, and overcoming selfishness, the ego, and anger, and these different things that create problems, pride, impatience, and developing humility and kindness and devotion to God, and seeing God in every human being. So this is a wonderful book by Omar Khayyam and interpreted by Paramahansa Yogananda. The next book is Showtime, the American Political Circus and the Race for the White House, published by Roger Simon, published in 1998. Now, I bought this new in the Philippines in 1998 for 999 pesos. That was a lot of money, so you can see I was really interested in politics. This is a book about the 1996 U.S. presidential election, which wasn't much of a contest. The Democratic nominee was the incumbent, Bill Clinton, and the Republican nominee was Bob Dole. And of course, Bill Clinton had tremendous charisma, and people knew he had a problem with women, but Bob Dole, on the other hand, was this World War II hero, and actually a different generation, much older. But Dole didn't have that charisma. Dole was kind of a dull fellow and a very good man. But anyway, this is all about that election, and Roger Simon did a very good job of describing. I always find it interesting, the race for the White House, the different candidates, and seeing how things are going with the various primaries, starting with the Iowa caucus and then New Hampshire and so forth. The next book is The Island of the Colorblind by Oliver Sacks, published in 1996. This is a wonderful book. It deals with islands in Micronesia, specifically Ponape, Guam, and Rota. It's a medical and botanical type book, and again, I read this because I spent a year on Guam from June of 1996 to June of 1997, and so I was kind of missing Guam, and so this was very appealing to me. It's a fine book. The next book is The Making of the President, 1964, by Theodore H. White, published in 1965. Now, in this election, you had the incumbent Democratic President Lyndon Johnson, who faced the Republican challenger Barry Goldwater. And I thought Theodore H. White made a wonderful comparison. He compared Goldwater to the Old Testament prophet Isaiah. And since Goldwater was from Arizona, which is like a desert-type state, that he compared that to the Sinai Desert. And so that Goldwater was sort of was warning the American people and was a prophet, but he was like the ancient Israelites, he was ignored. The ancient Israelites who are described in the Bible as stiff-necked, continually ignoring their prophets. So the American people voted for Lyndon Johnson. So I thought that was a fascinating comparison between the 1964 presidential election and ancient Israel, comparing Barry Goldwater to the ancient prophet Isaiah. So this was an interesting election. Again, it wasn't much of a race. Johnson won easily, and he was very popular. Although 4 years later, the Vietnam War would be his undoing. The next book is Riding the Iron Rooster by Paul Theroux, published in 1988. This is a train travel book in China. again, Thoreau this is what he did. This was his forte, right? Having train travel trips that he wrote about. And I thought the best parts were in Qingdao, that's Qindao, which had been built by Germany when China had sort of been divided up into spheres of influence between, you had the different European countries and so forth, and anyway, that was the German part. And then actually the best part of this book is about Tibet, which was an independent country, and now it's a part of China. And in my opinion, and actually in our church, we believe that India and Tibet are the holy lands. So Tibet's a very holy land. And even though Thoreau is you could say an atheist, he was really impressed by the Tibetan people, these people who would meditate, and they're just unbeatable. And he was very touched by the spirituality there, and before he left, he even said a prayer hoping that he would return. I think it's amazing. People see some people see that, how tragic it was when China conquered Tibet, and it was definitely tragic for the Tibetan people. But on the other hand, I think this allowed the Tibetans to have a strong influence on the rest of China, the spirituality of Tibet on China. So maybe there was a purpose, and of course Tibet became more famous worldwide because of that. People felt sympathy for them. So they're a very wonderful spiritual people. The next book is The Final Days by Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein, published in 1976. This is about the end of the Richard Nixon presidency, which came to an end in 1974 because of the Watergate scandal, which was a real mess. What a tangled web was woven by Richard Nixon and the different individuals involved in that scandal of Watergate. And so it was a very sad thing, what happened. The fall of Richard Nixon because of this shenanigans. And it was, the thing is, it was a tough time in American history. There was all this a rebellion and sort of conniving against the government, and people who wanted to overthrow the government, even who wanted to have a revolution. And the Vietnam War was tough. And anyway, Nixon didn't handle it very well. So this is all about that, about the end of Richard Nixon and that Watergate scandal. The next book is Tom Rart, 13 Days in the Sahara by Eleanor Clark, published in 1984. This book has long sentences. It's about the Sahara Desert, and which is itself a fascinating topic. The largest desert in the world, which is in North Africa. And I was reading this book, and I had mentioned it to a friend who was in the Philippines. He was actually a French fellow in the Philippines for a while, named Denny, and he had the desire to cross a desert with a nomadic people. Now that probably would be the Sahara, because that's just across the Mediterranean Sea from France. So I think it's a fascinating topic, the Sahara Desert. This huge desert in North Africa, and that's why I read this book. Very nice story, very nice account of the Sahara Desert. The next book is A Second Helping of Chicken Soup for the Soul by Jack Canfield and Mark Victor Hansen. I love this book. This was lent to me by our secretary at Resalest, Tessa Dolina, and it's one of the best books I ever read. I cried throughout the book. It's very touching. True stories of love, hope, and determination. And it's wonderful because we live in a world where people tend to be cynical and skeptical and pessimistic and critical and so forth. But this is a very positive, and it shows people, facing hard times, but continuing and winning the battle of life, so that we can make it. We all can make it. So this is very inspiring and very, very touching. Wonderful book. These Chicken Soup for the Soul's books are tremendous. The next book is Summerhill, A Radical Approach to Child Rearing by A.S. Neal, published in 1960. This was lent to me by an SRF friend in Manila, Betsy Bulanati, and this is about a school in England by this fellow, A.S. Neal. He had very different ideas about education. He was really against traditional education, where they're very strict and hard on the students, and students are afraid of the teachers and so forth. And he believed that adults should stop pressuring children so much and love them and give them freedom, that school should be a very positive experience, that learning should be enjoyable. It shouldn't be an ordeal that the children have to go through, although there's always a benefit to whatever situation we're in. But so this is a wonderful story, and it's a true story about a school, and hopefully we can have, and this has been my career as an educator, as a teacher, and I'm very hopeful that and things take time. We have to be patient, and if we're going to if the human race is going to evolve, and certainly schools are a very important part of that evolution, in treating children better, being more patient with them, understanding them, and helping their evolution better. And so his ideas were basically with giving children freedom and self-government, helping them to, and where they would really want to study. They wouldn't be forced to study. They would really want to study out of curiosity, and they would enjoy, there would be a joy of learning. So it's a wonderful, true story of this school in England, Summerhill. The next book is Tidings by William Wharton, published in 1987. This is a Christmas type story, and I read it during, I actually finished on Christmas Day, 1998. Of course, he's the author of Dad and Birdie, and so it's a nice topic. Here we're at Christmas now. It's a very interesting topic, an important topic, and hopefully Christmas time we can become closer to God. And of course there's the commercialization and emphasis on gift giving, but hopefully we can evolve, become better people, and improve our character, be more kind and patient and understanding, and evolve and become closer to God, and be nicer to other people. The next book is Song of Solomon by Toni Morrison, published in 1977. Toni Morrison is another one of these African-American authors who's done very well, along with Alice Walker. And this is a story of an African-American family going back to slavery days, all the way back into the... so this is a good job that she did, and because it's... Again, this is a history of our country, or the history of African Americans. So what they've been through from slavery and in the 1700s, 1800s, and then the end of slavery and Jim Crow and into the 20th century. It's a novel, so it's really a historical novel. Very good, very fine author. Toni Morrison from Lorain, Ohio. The next book is Jalanjalan, A Journey Through Iaga by Marites Vitog and Griselda Yabes. Chris Yabes was a friend of mine in the Manila SRF group in the Philippines, and this is a travel book through Borneo, Sulawesi, Mindanao, Tawi, and Sulu. So between the countries that were divided by European colonization, because Indonesia became Dutch, and then Borneo, or parts of Borneo, became British, Malaysia, and then the Philippines under the Spanish. So she was. This is a fine book about that part where these three countries come together, where Indonesia, Philippines, and Malaysia come together. Fine travel book. The next book is The Age of Innocence by Edith Wharton, published in 1920. What a wonderful novel. A real corker by Edith Wharton, to use an expression of my father. He liked to use the word a corker, something really good. And this is a novel about high society in New York City in the 1870s, and one man who faced the dilemma of his life. That's, again, a fascinating topic. We know what New York City is like today, but how about in the 1870s? Just imagine going back in time when, New York was really becoming powerful, and it was actually a very powerful city, but nothing like it is today. And so she did a really good job and she was going back in time. She wrote this in 1920, so she was writing about an earlier era that had disappeared. Fascinating. The next book is The Making of the President, 1960, by Theodore H. White, published in 1961. Well, this was a very interesting U.S. presidential election. John F. Kennedy, who was elected the first Roman Catholic president, and Richard Nixon, who was his opponent in the election, who had depression and was the Republican Party nominee. Adlai Stevenson, who had supporters, even though he'd been nominated twice and lost in two elections in 52 and 56. Happy Hubert Humphrey, who was on the scene for quite some time. Eventually was the nominee in '68. Lyndon Johnson, who was the not vice president, elected vice president under Kennedy. And so, yeah, this Theodore H. White does a tremendous job. These books that he wrote on the U.S. presidential elections, he did a very good job. And I always find the topic fascinating, the race for the White House, the individuals who are vying and competing to try to first win their party's nomination and then win the general election. He did a very good job of recording history, Theodore H. White. The next book is When the Cheering Stopped, The Strange Untold Story of the Last Years of Woodrow Wilson by Gene Smith, published in 1964. Well, Woodrow Wilson was elected president in 1912 and re-elected in 1916. He served 2 terms. And then this book is about the end of his presidency. He was the U.S. president during the First World War, and then he was trying to create the League of Nations, which was similar to the United Nations, and he was unable to get the U.S. Senate to ratify it. So the U.S. didn't join the League of Nations, and that kind of doomed that organization to ineffectiveness. And then he was going around the country trying to get popular support. He was really working very hard, working too much. Then he had a stroke. He was pretty much incapacitated. And then his wife was, you could say, acting as president in secret or with the connivance of a few. This was kept secret from the public that the president was really unable to function, and his wife was working on his behalf. So very interesting story. I think, he worked too much and he didn't live a balanced life. That's why he had the stroke. I think he wasn't getting enough exercise. But a very interesting story. Woodrow Wilson, who's actually Glenn Beck, whom I admire very much, is really down on Woodrow Wilson as one of the earlier people who helped usher in big government in the United States. The next book is Dr. Sheehan on Running by George Sheehan, M.D., published in 1975. This book had a very positive effect on me. It's all about how running is very helpful, very good for physical fitness. And as a result of this book, I took up running myself, and either playing basketball, which is running, or just going out for a run if I was going to play basketball. So that's what this book is about. This would be appeal to those who are into running or who are interested in physical fitness. I'm not sure if I could run now. My knees aren't so great, but at the time I took up his ideas of running and for my health, and it had a very positive effect on my life. The next book is Watership Down by Richard Adams, published in 1972. Yeah, this was recommended to me by a friend of mine, Mike Duff. It's a story about rabbits. It's the characters it's a novel, and the characters are rabbits. Just imagine what an imagination Richard Adams had, and I think this book is used in schools. Some of the characters, these rabbits, include Bigwig and Hazel, and then they have this expression, I guess when they're angry, Silflay Hraka, which means eat shit, and General Woundwort must have been a bad guy, and then in a real adventure, there's a seagull named Kehar who has a German accent who helps out in the struggle. And so it's a great story of rabbits and their challenges and political problems. Animals have politics too. Different animals trying to take power and so forth. And so that's what gets into this rabbit community and how they relate to each other. And in this story, wonderful story by Richard Adams, Watership Down. The next book is All Summer Long by Bob Greene, published in 1993. It's a wonderful book. Three buddies, 3 good friends who were age 43, decided to take the summer off work and travel around the country. After years as responsible workaholics, they wanted to have some fun, at least while they could enjoy it themselves. And Bob Greene's a wonderful writer. He's very positive. He has nostalgia, and it was a interesting concept. And this is a true story. They decided, when you're young, you have your summer vacation, and then when you start working. Of course, you don't have all summer off unless you're a teacher, these fellows. So they took off for the summer and traveled around the country and had adventures and went to places they'd been through when they were younger. So it's a wonderful book, all summer long. The next book is The Commanders by Bob Woodward, published in 1991. And this is about the George Bush Sr. presidency, he was elected in 1988 until 92, and it deals with the war with Panama and Iraq. The Panama had a dictator, Manuel Noriega, who became a problem because he was involved in drug trafficking, and in fact, and he was very defiant of the United States. And of course, the Panama Canal is in Panama, so it's a kind of a sensitive issue dealing with that country, and very important, the Panama Canal. And I believe Manuel Noriega declared war on the United States, and the U.S. went in and invaded Panama and overthrew him, and they had a new government take over. They called him Pineapple because his face had pits, and looked he must have had some scarring from disease. And then the other war was what they called the Gulf War after Iraq under Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait and took Kuwait, said, well, this is ours now. And then the war where the United States organized allies, and they went over and to drive the Iraqis out of Kuwait and liberated Kuwait. So this is about these two wars under the presidency of George Bush Sr. I think they call him George H.W. Bush. The next book is The Day Christ Died by Jim Bishop, published in 1957. This is about the 24-hour time period on Good Friday, when it was with Jesus Christ and the story of the end of his life, his arrest, trial, sentence, and execution. It was all very, very fast. He was between the arrest, the trial took place shortly. I think he was arrested on. He was arrested Thursday night, and then he was tried in the morning, and then and the sentence came out, and he was executed. It was all very fast. So that's what this book is all about: the events of Good Friday, and by Jim Bishop, when the day Jesus Christ died, and so very important book. He did a good job. The next book is Barbara Bush, a memoir by Barbara Bush, published in 1994. Barbara Bush was the First Lady. Her husband is George Bush Sr., and she was First Lady during his presidency from 1989 to 1993, because he served one term, and she's a wonderful person, has such a wonderful sense of humor, and she quotes Helmut Kohl, who was the German chancellor, and he said to her when they were meeting at one point, it's terrific meeting a woman with a lustful appetite. And he was kind of flirting with her, but she's kind of hefty, you could say, a big woman. She was definitely not that skinny, and so he was making, remarking about that she enjoyed eating. She wasn't afraid to put on some weight. And anyway, I think Barbara Bush is a wonderful woman, very positive. Her husband was president, and then her son, George W. Bush. And so, very interesting. And she didn't take herself too seriously. Very positive. She enjoyed life. Very lively woman. Very good person. And I think this is a wonderful book about her experiences in politics with her husband, her life. Very interesting life they lived. They had, and during the presidency, of course, which was that was the pretty dramatic time if you're going to be First Lady of the United States. So wonderful book written by Barbara Bush about her life. The next book is Washington, the Indispensable Man by James Thomas Flexner, published in 1969. When I read this book, I called it the ultimate book on American politics, a biography of George Washington. Now, this is, the key thing in this is the title, The Indispensable Man, because his whole theme is that the American Revolution would not have been won, the American War of Independence against Great Britain, if not for George Washington's leadership, because it was such a tough war fighting Great Britain, and And it was Washington who kept things going, who kept the army going, because it was very, very hard. And without if we didn't win the war, we couldn't have had the U.S. Constitution. And of course, he was also part of that. And he served as the first U.S. president. And again, his character, he was a good man. George Washington was a good man. He was kind and patient and persevering, hardworking, patriotic, and very good fellow. And that's why he's the father of our country. And without him, we wouldn't be who we are. And we should remember him more, and I think the lesson of his life is that the character is what counts in life. We need to have good character if we want to have a good life. And he set the example as the father of our country. The next book is the Star Wars trilogy. Star Wars, The Empire Strikes Back, and Return of the Jedi. So these are actually 3 books in one volume by George Lucas, Donald Glut, and James Caan, published in 1976, 1980, and 1983. So these are the first 3, the books about dealing with the first 3 Star Wars movies, which were actually 4, 5, and 6. And they started with 4, 5, and 6, and they came out with 1, 2, and 3. And I think now we're up to 8. They came out with 7 and now 8, just very recently. So these are this talks about these wonderful characters, that we've come to know and love from the Star Wars movie: Luke Skywalker, Han Solo, Yoda, Chewbacca, Princess Leia, R2-D2, C-3PO, Darth Vader, and all these. And it's such an entertaining story. Again, the same theme of good against evil and facing challenging situation. And Luke's the young fella. Han's very funny. It was really sad that he died. Han Solo died in I think it was episode 7, because he was such a funny guy. And the wise Yoda and Chewie, we never know what Chewbacca is saying, because he just sort of roars. And then C-3PO is so funny because gets worried, and he's has a British accent. Darth Vader, who's the ultimate villain, you could say. The next book is In the Beauty of the Lilies by John Updike, published in 1996. I think this is John Updike's best book. It's incredible. It's a story it's a novel about a family from 1910 to 1990. Just imagine 80 years of an American family, 4 generations, and it's incredible how Updike captured the times of an era and the changing times and the aging of characters and the blending of generations. Really incredible. These interesting characters. The minister, who was, there's a minister in this book, and Clarence, his son, and Teddy the mailman, the granddaughter Essie, who became a movie star, and the great-grandson Clark, who was a lost soul. And aren't we all? Well, we don't have to be lost souls, but sometimes we have been. So I really recommend this. It's a great story, great historical novel of the United States in the 20th century. Very interesting. The next book is The Crown of Columbus by Louise Erdrich and Michael Doris, published in 1991. This is a historical thriller. And the authors were Dartmouth professors, I believe, and the action takes place in Dartmouth and the Bahamas. And it's makes reference to Christopher Columbus, when the first, what is considered the first, or which led to much contact between Europe and America, when Columbus crossed the Atlantic Ocean in 1492. And they say discovered America, which meant for Europeans, for them, they was learning that this continent was there. Although the Vikings actually had been there earlier, except that knowledge had not been widespread. And so this was basically, Europeans didn't know that America existed, North and South America. And actually, he arrived in the Caribbean. He arrived in the Bahamas, and so much of this book takes place in the Bahamas. And very interesting story, because it's a historical thriller. Very appeals to me. Goes between the past and the present. There's archaeology, and then Columbus, his arrival, and wonderful story. I highly recommend this book. It looks like we're out of time. Thank you so much for watching. I appreciate it. I hope I didn't bore you too much. Hope it wasn't a bore fest.
Hope you find a good book to read. Live long and prosper. May the force be with you. God bless you. God bless the Philippines, America, and the whole world. I'll see you next time.